right, welcome to the All Creatures Podcast. This is Chris, and today, again, always excited to do these interviews, and this one I've been trying to line up for a while. But this is Theo Van Noort for here in New Zealand. Hey, Theo, how you doing?
Hey, Chris. Good, thanks.
Yeah, thanks for doing this. I have been bugging you for a while, so thank you. And just to give
No worries.
the listeners a brief background, Theo works with my wife here in New Zealand, and he's primarily insect research. But I went to a Friday seminar. I got invited, and he took a trip down to the Antipodes, which I'll let Theo talk more about it here in a minute, but is one of the most remote, I would say, one of the most remote places on Earth. And Theo, correct me if I'm wrong, but I looked it up. It's about 1,000 kilometers from New Zealand. Is that right?
It's 760 kilometers southeast.
Okay, from the southeast tip. Okay, so it's still pretty far, right?
It's pretty far.
Yeah, in the sub-Antarctic. And Theo just got back a couple months ago, back in March, from the Antipodes, where he was part of a project called the $1 Million Mouse Project. And I'm going to let him describe more of what it is. But anyways, I listened to the seminar and I was like, oh my God, I got to see if I can get him on the podcast. It just was an amazing story, amazing trip, talking about invasive species, things like that on this one sub-Antarctic island. So welcome, Theo. Thank you. And this is going to be great. I know our listeners are going to love this.
No, thanks for having me.
Yeah. So the first thing I always like to ask is just kind of give a background about you, where you grew up. Obviously you're currently living in New Zealand.
So I grew up on a farm in Northland, which is the northernmost region of New Zealand. And I was around nature. My parents had a nice native bush block, which I spent a lot of time in as a kid. And I basically developed a bit of a love for insects. And I kind of carried that on into my university academic life after I left high school. So I studied ecology and biology at Auckland University, and I completed my master's there as well. So, my master's degree was in ecology and conservation, and I was looking at vespular wasps, which are invasive species of wasp here in New Zealand, which cause major ecological damage. And since I finished my master's, I've started working at plant and food research with Ashley, your wife, as you mentioned. And we study pollination, basically, by insects in crops. So, it was through my master's, the network of people that I met through that I got to go to the Antipodes Island. So, really grateful for that.
No, it's amazing. And the people we're meeting here in New Zealand, and it's just incredible. It's incredible. Like, and before Theo gave a talk, his friend Max gave a talk. He went to a separate island. What island did he go to?
So that was Auckland Island.
Yeah. Okay.
I believe. Yeah.
Yeah. So another kind of remote sub-Antarctic island. And it's crazy. The stuff that's going on down here is just amazing, especially from us from the United States that, I guess we have the Great White North with Canada and the Arctic, but anything with the Antarctic down here is just really cool. So, you're working on pollination. It's interesting. Is there a conservation aspect to that? I think one thing we haven't covered a lot in our podcast yet, and Angie and I are still kind of like, do we start going into insects or not? But,
you totally have to.
I know. It's just, they're so cool. And, my wife has given me a deep respect, for honeybees and other insects. But is there I guess just for the listeners' benefit, before we jump into the $1 Million Mouse Project, is there a conservation aspect with insects right now? I guess from a global look, and then you just talked about, what your master's work was here in New Zealand. But if you can kind of give a perspective on that.
Yeah. So a lot of work in New Zealand is focused on controlling invasive species, especially with insects. So there's big efforts to keep invasive ants and other Hymenoptera out of the country because they can do real big damage to our conservation values. But there are native insects which there are active conservation programs to protect. So giant weta, I don't know if you're
Mm-hmm.
familiar with
Mm-hmm.
giant weta.
That's probably one of the insects we'll do. That thing is insane.
Yeah.
It's the
Oh,
size,
they're really
size of
cool.
your hand, right? They're huge.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think they're the heaviest insect in the world.
Yeah.
So they're huge.
Yeah.
So there's a breeding program with those in Auckland, with the Auckland Zoo and Butterfly Creek, I think.
Mm.
And yeah, there's a few other things. There's the Cromwell chafer, which is a neat beetle
Mm.
in the South Island, and I think the park where they're found is the only uh, what do you call it, reserve, which
Mm-hmm.
is a conservation land in the world, which is solely for the purpose of conserving an insect. So
Mm-hmm.
that's quite cool.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah,
No, yeah, that's
I
that.
can't think of anything else off
Yeah,
the top
no,
of my
no,
head,
no,
but
no, no. That's great though. I mean, it is, and you know, I talk to Ashley all the time about bees and you know what's going on around the world with them. So I'm privy to some of this stuff, but it's still you know outside my expertise. I leave it up to her to do that.
yeah,
So right now, you said you're doing pollination work. When you went on this, I guess the first question I should ask is, can you just describe what the $1 Million Mouse Project was or is?
yeah. So the $1 Million Mouse Project was a eradication attempt to try remove house mice from the Antipodes Island. So the Antipodes Island is actually a World Heritage Area, so it's um,
Mm-hmm.
got enormous conservation values there, including a whole range of endemic insects and birds. And so it's basically really unique. It's a 2,000 hectare island, so quite large, and the terrain is really gnarly. So it's
Yeah, yeah, I saw that from your pictures. Yeah.
yeah. So that's what the project was trying to do, was remove these mice from the island, which had been established in the 1800s, I think, from either sealers or shipwrecks that landed on the island.
Right. Yeah, right. So it was, you know, in the podcast we do talk quite a bit about, you know, invasive species and, you know, these animals are moving around the world with us, right?
Hmm.
As we move and explore and so here you have this really unique biome,
Mm-hmm.
you know, ecological niche here with all these different animals. You get these introduced mice and they were like what they were feasting, they were just having a good old time, weren't they?
Yeah, right. So yeah, they got to really high densities on the island. So uh, I think about 150 per hectare. So yeah, really high numbers, and because they're generalists, they eat basically anything they can get their paws on. So
Mm-hmm.
invertebrates, bird eggs, seeds. So this was having quite a big impact on the local wildlife, basically. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, can you give a couple examples of a couple species that were suffering? I mean, do we know if any went extinct because of them, or not? Maybe not extinct, but I guess
Yeah. Well,
eradicated. Yeah.
there's two species of beetle, I think, that are no longer found on the Antipodes Islands. So, and
Okay.
that's well, probably, well, most likely because of the mice predation, and
Mm-hmm.
as well as that, various birds, especially ground nesting birds like the Antipodes snipe, which is endemic
Mm-hmm.
snipe on the island. Its population was quite low, I believe, and that was from predation as well.
So one of the questions I have is how did the scientists and everybody behind this project, you know, how did they eradicate the mice? What were the things they were using?
So the mice were eradicated with a aerial bait. So they used a helicopter and they aerially dropped Brodificum, which is a bait which is toxic to mice, onto the island, and so they spread them with these big buckets from helicopters. It took so helicopters basically.
So how long ago did they go and bait the island? Do you know?
I think it was 2016 that they did the drop,
Okay.
but they've been planning it
Okay.
for a long time. So it was in 2012 that uh, Gareth Morgan, a guy in New Zealand, a bit of a
Mm-hmm.
philanthropist, started campaigning for it, and I think the planning began in 2014, and that's when they started doing monitoring of bird species and getting that background information on how many mice are on the island and yeah, how the birds and stuff were doing. And then the actual
Okay.
bait drop happened in 2016. And so uh, the trip that I went on, the monitoring trip was conducted in 2018, this year.
Mm-hmm.
So that's
Mm-hmm.
a good 2 years since the bait was dropped. And so we were looking at the outcomes of that eradication.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Right. And I guess we could talk about the trip itself, but the first step, and it's really cool how you talked about this. But can you first describe how you got there from New Zealand, and then we'll talk through the trip, I guess.
Yeah, right. So because it's so far away, there's no landing strip on the island. The only way to get to the Antipodes is by boat. And so we left from Dunedin, which is a city in the South Island, and it took about 2 days by a Navy boat. So we went on one of the offshore patrol vessels, which the New Zealand Navy has, and they dropped us off by, it was like a wet landing basically. So they had to use
Mm-hmm.
little inflatable boats to land us on the island because there's also no port there. So yeah, it was a quite a long journey just to get to the.
Right, right. And how long were you there for doing your assessments?
So we were there for about 1 month period. So from mid February till mid March.
Oh wow.
Yeah,
Okay, and then for the listeners, that is like summer, height of summer here, right? So
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
I hear that. Yeah, okay. So it wasn't like the height of winter,
No,
sub-Antarctic temperatures. It was, but still, it was kind of cold, wasn't it?
yeah. Oh, it was a balmy 11 degrees, 10 degrees.
Yeah. Okay.
That's
Okay. So that's like,
Celsius.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So for Fahrenheit, that's like 50, right? That's what it was about
Yeah,
today. Um, so you were there for a month. So you had to bring all your supplies, right? I mean, it was you had
yeah,
to bring all your food, everything, right?
yeah, yeah. So there was yeah, all the we were really lucky. All the supplies were dropped off before we got there, so we didn't have to carry them up the cliff, which was quite lucky. We did have to
Yeah.
bring all the equipment that we needed to use. So that was a bit of a exercise getting it up the cliffs because the entire island's ringed by cliffs. So that was fun.
Yeah, yeah. And can you just, I guess you could just, in your own words, kind of describe the terrain there? And I will, if so kind, or I'll try to find them on the internet, but if you have some of the
Mm,
pictures that you showed,
totally, yeah.
of the terrain there, and you said it's pretty rough and there's no paths, right?
No.
So you were breaking a lot of brush.
Yeah, so it's unlike anything I've sort of been in before. So there's no trees on the island. Well, there's a few shrubby, really small trees, but they don't grow above 2.5, 3 meters. And it's entirely ringed by cliffs, and it's quite hilly for the most part. But the main vegetation is tussocks and grasses and ferns, which doesn't sound too bad, but they can grow really deep, really, really deep.
Mm-hmm.
And the soil on the island is really peaty, so and because there's so many seabirds, the seabirds burrow into it and create these great big burrows. So you're walking on the island where there's no tracks on the island at all. You're sort of walking and pushing your way through waist height grasses and ferns and falling into these burrows, and yeah, it's really, really difficult to get around.
Yeah, yeah. Oh man, those pictures, yeah, it's pretty funny. And so what did you do specifically there? And then maybe if you can talk about what some of the other people were doing. But I guess first, what were you doing specifically?
So we were doing outcome monitoring, which is looking at the effect of removing the mice from the island on the endemic wildlife. So I was particularly interested in the invertebrates. So the types of monitoring that I was doing were pitfall traps, which are little holes dug into the ground with a cup put into them and a little bit of glycol and water, and covered with a plastic cover. And these pitfall traps capture ground-dwelling invertebrates. So you can, if you do this over a number of years, you can see how invertebrate populations might change, and you can get a good idea of what the diversity is like. And I was also doing hand collections, so just wandering around the island and looking for anything that looked particularly interesting. Yeah, so those are the two types of monitoring that I was doing. The the really important monitoring that was going on while I was there was the results monitoring, which is looking at whether or not the mouse eradication that was done in 2016 was successful. So the idea of the eradication was to remove every single mouse from the island. And so there's two types of monitoring or results monitoring that we were doing. The first was using tunnels with a sticky ink pad inside them. And so there was a team of people there who were putting these tunnels across the island, and they'd leave them out for about 10 days or 10 nights. And when you gather them in, you can see if there were any mouse tracks in the sticky ink. So you can, maybe I'll give you a picture so you can get an idea of what that looks like. But basically, if you see a mouse track on the inside the sticky pad, then you can tell that there's been a mouse there. And the other type of monitoring, which was really cool, was using dogs to sniff for mice. So the dog team, they were amazing. They had 3 dogs, and there was 2 of them, 2 handlers, and they basically covered the entire island with these 3 little dogs. And if the dogs smelt a mouse, so they're really specially trained, if they smelted a mouse, they'd give a special indication. I think it was like raising their right foot and looking extra cute or something.
Yeah.
And the handler would know that they'd just sniffed a mouse, and then they could spend extra time there or send the tracking tunnel team in to investigate a little bit further. But yeah, so from all that monitoring, they found no mice on the island. So that's a pretty good indication that the eradication attempt was successful. So it's really amazing.
Yeah, it was. It really was. Like I was at the edge of my seat listening to you talk about it. So do they have any plans to go back and do another assessment?
So I think the plan is to go back in about 5 years and redo the monitoring. Yeah, I'm not entirely sure on that, but
they do. At some point they will.
Yeah, with eradication attempts like this, you've just got to keep on checking because even though there was no mice found this year, it is a really big island, and there is some really gnarly terrain there, like 100-meter cliff faces,
right.
And like I said, the bird burrows and just really hard to get to places, which, if there might be, like, let's say there was one mouse there, they could start a population again.
Right.
So you've got to keep on going back. But from the monitoring that we did, it looks like they're eradicated. So
it's just crazy because, talking to, or looking at invasive species throughout all these islands in the Pacific Ocean and, Indian Ocean, and I'm sure in the Atlantic too. So it's nice to see, it worked.
Yeah.
And
totally,
this special population. So I have so many questions about this trip. So how did you survive for a month? Was it like really kind of tough, or were you just like camping for a month and this is awesome?
It was a lot better than I expected, actually. Yeah. I've got to give the Department of Conservation so you obviously know them, but maybe your listeners don't. So the the Government Conservation Group in New Zealand, they did an amazing job of organizing our food, and the entire trip was just really well planned. So we're stocked with really great food. I can't get over
Okay.
how great the
It's
food
good.
was.
Yeah.
Juza, the camp mum, she she was an incredible chef and just put on the best fares for us when we came home after
Hmm.
a long day of work.
Hmm.
But yeah, the cabin that we were staying in slept 6 people, so there was bunk beds, and then a few of the others who didn't want to sleep in bunk beds slept outside in tents. But yeah, it was like a really quite luxurious trip, really. Apart from only being able to shower once every 5 days because of
Yeah. Yeah.
water limitations, but you kind of
Right. Right.
everyone kind of got used to the stench of everyone else pretty quickly, I think.
Yeah. 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 I've been there, done that.
Yeah, yeah,
Ex-military. Yeah. Being out in the field is not fun, but yeah, I mean, it's just, you're out in one of the most remote places on Earth. I mean, I really thought about this and I was like,
mm,
yeah, you're out there. I mean, sub-Antarctic island, it's crazy.
yeah, totally.
So,
Yeah, I mean,
yeah, I mean,
there's no way to be evacuated. Well, sorry, no, cut
yeah,
that because there was an evacuation from the island. But
okay.
it's really far away. So to get down to us would have taken a boat 2 or 3 days sort of thing. So
Hmm.
it was in the
Yeah.
back of my mind the whole time, like, wow, if something goes wrong here, then it's gonna be
Yeah. Watch where you
yeah,
step.
watch where
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
step. Maybe I won't
Yeah.
make that awkward jump across the stream.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. So I guess one of the things you sent me to, and I'd like to link it for the listeners, is the sounds. And you said the sounds. I do want to get to what you saw, but this one just gets to me too because I'm sitting here thinking of you like late at night. I imagine the stars were just insane.
Yeah, yeah,
You
they're
know,
really good. I
I just
kind of missed
imagine.
out. I didn't get to see the Southern Lights, Aurora Australis, but um,
Yeah,
yeah, I was hoping to, but the stars were amazing anyway. Yeah,
yeah. I mean, just no like very. I don't think any light pollution down there. So it's just the things you could see is just incredible. And then you said the sounds were just crazy, right?
uh, unlike anything I've ever heard before. Yeah, just truly amazing. Yeah. So that
Yeah.
was the that's the bird life, especially at night. So when we were camping on the southern side of the island, we I don't know why, but that area we're on the side of a mountain called Mount Waterhouse. I think that's where we were at least. It was about there.
Mm-hmm.
There was just so many nesting seabirds across the island, and at night they just totally come alive with crazy sounds. You have to play some. You really will have to play some.
Yeah, yeah, I will. I
But
will. I will. I'll probably splice them in, and then I'll probably open the podcast with some of them too. I'm already thinking of that, but
yeah,
yeah, I'll splice them in here, and then people can listen to it. So what? I mean, to me, when I listened to some of it, it sounded like out of a horror movie.
yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, sorry. Yeah, when we were camping on the southern coast, there was a few nights where you'd almost go crazy with the sound because you just couldn't get to sleep. So the birds would be, you'd hear them come out of their burrow kind of thing, and they'd be a couple of meters away from the tent, and then they'd just start squawking and squawking. There's, yeah,
You're
just
like,
unreal.
shut up. Yeah.
But thousands of
Pretty
them.
good.
That was the thing, just thousands of them.
Yeah. 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 So I guess what are some of the wildlife that you got to see while you were there?
Um, yeah, so there's a few endemic species of bird. I think the southernmost, or the southernmost parrots in the world, the Rychek's parakeet and the Antipodes Island parakeet. So they're quite cute little parrots. And there are snipe, which are like a ground-dwelling bird. But probably the most amazing were the albatross. So there's quite a number of species of albatross, but the wandering albatross in particular, which is the largest wingspan bird in the world. I think
Mm-hmm.
its wingspan gets to like 3.1 meters or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's one of the major nesting sites in the world, and they are just phenomenal. Yeah, they really blew my mind. I wasn't expecting to just be so, um, yeah, in awe of a bird because I'm such an insect nerd. But yeah, the
Right. Right.
albatross are
Right.
just so amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. And then your favorite penguins, right? You
Yeah,
saw a bunch of them. Yeah.
I developed a bit of a, I won't say hate. Hate's a strong word, but yeah,
Yeah.
they're not my favorite
Annoyance.
animal. Yeah, it was more out of practicality than anything, just because yeah, the way that you move around the island is well, yeah, penguin colonies happen to be really convenient for moving through, but penguins themselves don't like being moved, and so they'd sometimes peck you and get in your way, and they're always it stinks and it's noisy. Yeah,
I can imagine.
yeah,
And they because oh, what were they? The rock hopper? Or what penguin species was it?
yeah.
I'm
Rockhoppers
trying to
and
remember. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
yellow crested
Right.
penguins. Yeah,
Right. So you see them, and you're like, oh, cool, and then just working with them, you're like, oh my god. Well,
yeah.
because these animals really don't have any fear of humans, right? I mean,
No, not
you,
really. Well, I
you
mean,
yeah.
so the parakeets and the other birds on the island were really tame, and in fact, within the first 5 minutes of landing on the island, Pipit, which is like a little brown bird, quite charismatic but a bit drab looking,
Mm-hmm.
one of them landed on the archaeologist's knee just as he was sitting eating lunch, and we're all just a little bit mind blown by that. But yeah,
Yeah.
so the animals, because there's no human population or permanent population on the island, and there's usually only maybe two people per year, except when these big events happen. Yeah, the wildlife is completely naive to humans, basically. So
Mm-hmm.
they're pretty tame. In saying that, though, I mean, yeah, you can't talk about the sub-Antarctic islands without talking about the sealing that went on in
Mm-hmm.
the, you know, when would it have been? Late
Yeah, and the
1800s to
whales, right? Yeah.
1900s, yeah. So
Yeah.
Antipodes Island seal population was completely decimated, and so the seals, I don't know, maybe I was imagining it, but they were really wary of us. So you couldn't
Mm-hmm.
get too close to them because they'd just sprint into the ocean. But
Right.
yeah,
And they were what? They had fur seals and elephant seals. Is that right?
yeah, fur seals and elephant seals and subantarctic seal. We saw one subantarctic seal.
Okay.
I forget what we
Okay.
called him. I think we called him Gary or something like that.
Oh yeah.
Like, oh yeah, have you seen Gary today? Yep, yep.
He's just hanging out.
Yeah,
He's like, it's too cold down there, man. I'm
yeah,
gonna hang out up here.
yeah.
Nice balmy 11 degrees Celsius weather. Um. So how did you? So who else was on the island? Was it you that had the BBC film crew there? Because the only reason I'm asking is I think Planet Earth too. I just watched it a month ago.
Mm.
They had albatross. I think from the Antipodes. That's where they
Uh,
filmed it.
no, so
I
I think
think.
that was on Campbell Island. I only just watched
Oh, was it
Planet
Campbell
Earth
Island?
2,
Okay.
like 2 months
Okay.
ago. But
Yeah.
yeah, I think it
Okay.
was Campbell Island, but quite
Okay.
similar in its
Yeah.
you know, fauna and vegetation. But yeah, but
Right.
yeah,
Okay.
there was a BBC film crew, just for the actually, I'm not entirely sure if they were BBC. I'm fairly sure
Okay.
that they were, but yeah,
Yeah.
maybe
I don't remember if it was you or if Max said it was, but one of you had a film crew there or somebody else was there.
actually I think we both
Um,
did.
yeah.
So that kind
Yeah.
of murkies
Yeah, because
things.
he had the moth. He was doing the moth thing, right? And
Yeah, so
they were yeah
he was
for a
studying
crew.
he was studying pollination by moths on one of the sub-Antarctic islands. So yeah.
Right, right,
Mm.
right. Yeah. So did you guys work together well, or did people get under your skin, get a little crazy on that little island fever?
Yeah, well, I think everyone did go a little bit crazy, but luckily enough, we all got along really well. Um,
Yeah.
it was, yeah, it was quite amazing actually. Like we bonded so much, and it really did feel like a bit of a family unit by the end. With you know, Juza, the hut mum, she looked after us
Mm.
really well, and it was a bit like having a mum. And yeah, there was how many were there? There was nine of us for the full
Hmm.
period. In the beginning, there was a few dignitaries and like the New Zealand government's Minister of Conservation, Eugenie Sage, was there,
Mm.
and the head for Doc for the South Island, he was there, and the Navy people. But for the most part, it was just the nine of us. So yeah, we all went a little bit insane, but it kind of worked out, and no one murdered each other. So
No,
it
I
was
know,
good.
I know. Yeah, you all made it back.
Yeah.
Well, you're the only one that made it back, right? Yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah.
No, I just imagine it's getting disconnected from the world for a month.
Yeah.
And so what was it like? I mean, I still want to talk a little bit more about the trip, but what was it like when you got back? Was it a little overwhelming with like,
Yeah.
your cell phone, the TV, all that stuff?
Yeah, it was quite overwhelming. I think the main thing was just seeing, or yeah, going from this like completely remote island to the real world was just really jarring.
Yeah.
I had to take a day off sick actually the next day just to sort of recalibrate my mind to being in the real world. Yeah, it's funny I say the real world like as though the
Yeah.
Antipodes isn't the real world, but
Yeah.
it's just yeah changes you somehow.
It's
Eh?
yeah, back to civilization,
Yeah,
right? So it
civilization. Yeah.
was yeah, yeah, yeah. And and I'm sure you had some comforts down there. But I guess what did you bring? Books or
Yeah, well, we were actually really lucky and we had internet,
yeah.
so when I tell
Oh
people
wow,
that, they're
okay.
like, oh,
Jeez.
wow, geez. But, I mean, we had
Yeah.
a data limit and stuff, and to be honest,
Yeah.
I didn't really use it at all. I mean, to keep in basic contact with people, but, yeah, it was,
Yeah.
yeah, I did a lot of
I was
reading,
just gonna
and
say it.
we played a ton of board games,
Yeah.
so, yeah, that kind of got us through, yeah.
Yeah. Do you have any recommendations for the listeners?
For
Good board games?
board games, oh, absolutely. Settlers of Catan. It's
Okay. Yeah. That's a good one.
yeah,
Yep.
yeah. I've gone and bought
Okay.
it
Okay.
since I've got back. I'm a bit obsessed. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you're ever stranded on an island, that's the one thing you bring is
Uh,
Settlers of Catan.
I mean, it depends if you want to get along with your co-island
Yeah.
inhabitants, you know. But
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's pretty great. So what's the one thing that really stands out about your experience there? Like you're just like wow.
Um, Probably. Uh, I've got a really vivid memory of standing in the northern plains and just having an albatross fly probably within 2 meters of my face,
Mm.
and just like eyeballing me. Like I'm sure we made eye contact. It sounds a bit
Yeah.
cheesy, but yeah, I'm sure it looked me dead in the eye and sort of yeah. It was
I
a bit of a
wonder if you're
moment.
good to eat. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, but yeah, probably the albatross were just absolutely phenomenal. Like they did. So the northern plains I mentioned it before is like a great big flat area on the island. It's maybe
Mm,
like a kilometer or 2 kilometers wide and long.
mm,
And so the albatross just do great big figure eights around that area, and they fly really low to the ground. So at times, within a meter of the ground. And yeah, it's just standing on those planes and watching them fly around is just amazing with their 3 meter wingspan.
right.
So
Yeah.
that yeah, that really stands out in my mind.
Yeah, I mean, it's again a once in a lifetime experience, I imagine. Or
Mm,
if you get to go back in a few years and do it again, but
yeah.
it just sounds like wow, like just what an experience. Now there was a bird I think you talked about that was kind of a jerk, right? To put it, PG.
Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about.
Which one's that? What bird is that?
So that's the skewer. So
Okay, that's right.
yeah, they're yeah. Is this a family friendly show? It must be. Yeah.
PG-13. Yeah, 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 yeah.
All right.
Yeah, I know that's not the word you used, but for our listeners, I will.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So the skewers were oh, I keep wanting to default back to bad language.
Yeah,
They're a
yeah,
major jerk
yeah,
burgers. Um,
yeah. There you go.
yeah, so they're a bit like a seagull. Are you familiar? Yeah, you must be familiar with seagulls.
Yeah,
Like a
yeah, yeah. Seagulls. Yeah.
like a really really aggressive and annoying seagull. So they're really tame, and they so the main thing that they'd do was rip the tracking cards out of the tunnels. So
Oh
those
God.
are the ink tunnels I mentioned before.
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
yeah, so the ink or the tracking cards had a dollop of peanut butter to lure in, well, non-existent mice to
Right.
eat it, but the skewers would rip the tracking tunnel out and eat that dollop of peanut butter and make an absolute mess of them. Um, and they'd also rip out my pitfall traps, and just for the fun of it, I think they just pull them out and empty them. But yeah, sometimes you'd be sitting there and you'd feel like a presence behind you, and you'd turn around and there'd be a skewer just sitting right beside you, thinking, "Can I eat you? Can I eat you?" And I'm sure if you lay down and closed your eyes, they'd like have a go at you, like they'd
Yeah.
peck your eyes out or something.
Oh, yeah.
But
Oh
yeah, so
man.
they're yeah, they're really cool birds actually. They're one of my favorites from the island. They
Yeah.
they're just so neat and charismatic. They'd come right up
Yeah.
to you, and yeah, they're real survivors.
Yeah, no, it was you. I remember you talking about it. Yeah, I was cracking up. Just oh man, and the colorful language to describe them
Yeah, sorry.
was pretty great. It was pretty great. No, it was great. It was
I,
great.
I probably went a bit yeah, used a bit too much colorful language for a Friday afternoon at work, but oh well.
It's okay. You described them perfectly.
Yeah.
So, I guess one of the things. So you were there for a month and collected all this data, and you said uh, there's a PhD student. She's analyzing it now, looking at the insect population.
Yep.
So, just anecdotally, what do you think what did you see when you were there? I guess in regards to the insect population.
Yeah, so it looked like the insect population has increased quite dramatically, especially in insects with a short generation time. I think that's quite evident, especially in things like flies. So I saw lots of flies, um, especially in our hut. So that was quite
Yeah,
obvious. From previous years, it seemed like, well, not that I've been there previous years, but
yeah.
from what other people who have been there seem to think that there were way more flies in the hut. And that sounds like a bad thing, but the flies and the other insects are actually really important as drivers of ecosystem services like
Mm,
pollination and decomposition, but also as a food source, especially for the native birds on the island,
mm,
like the
mm.
pipit that I mentioned earlier. And we saw a lot of out and about on the island, a lot of um, caterpillars and moths and yeah, stuff like that. So there's no native bees on the island, which was kind of interesting from my
Mm.
perspective. But I did notice, yeah, the flies were visiting flowers, and yeah, various other things were visiting flowers too, like beetles and stuff. So yeah, it was quite cool.
Yeah, it's just this whole unique ecosystem, right? And I mean, you said you've mentioned some Antipodes species. So there's species that are just on that island, or are
Yeah.
they in some other sub-Antarctic islands?
Uh, in regards to insects,
Well,
or
Yeah, yeah, insects, and then I guess the birds too. I mean, I know an albatross is going to be all over, the oceans, but you said there were some Antipodes birds that were they just on that island? Do you know that?
Yeah, yeah. So the parakeets.
Hmm.
So there's two species of parakeets: the Reich's parakeet and the Antipodean. Oh, geez, Antipodian Island parakeet.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
that
that's a big word. Yeah,
yeah, so
yeah,
they're really cool little parrots, basically, and it's really interesting to see parrots just that far south because you tend to think of
right.
parrots as being tropical birds, but um,
Yeah,
they've
yeah.
they've managed to find their way that far south, kind of thing. And there's also a species of snipe, uh, which is like a little ground dwelling bird with a long nose, or long beak, sorry. It looks a little bit
Mm-hmm.
like a kiwi almost, but it can fly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so those are the two main or three main endemic species of land dwelling bird on the island. I think there's one more, but that one's
Yeah.
escaping me for the moment. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, there's a whole lot of endemic insects as well, um, and a lot less is known about the insects just because they're a bit harder to find. But for instance, I was looking for a, a genus of flightless beetle, which is only found
Mm-hmm.
in crustose lichen rock faces. So yeah, and we found quite a large number of those on the island. And anecdotally, it seemed like there were more this year around than in previous monitoring trips. So whether or not that's
Mm-hmm.
from the mice, I'm not sure. But yeah, it was really neat to see
Do,
the insects doing really well.
yeah, do you think you would find a new species of insect?
Oh, totally, yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, just because they haven't been, I mean, insects are chronically under-described. So yeah,
right,
if you put your mind to it, I'm sure you could describe a whole bunch, get your name
right.
immortalized.
That's what I was saying. Like, are you going to be able to name a beetle the Theo beetle or something? That'd be awesome.
I wish, yeah. I'm not a
Yeah,
taxonomist, though. Yeah.
yeah. So just be like, hey, you got to put my name in there somewhere,
Yeah, yeah.
because at our news show we talk about new species discovered, and
Mm.
these scientists in Ecuador have found these snail eating snakes, and
Oh,
they're
wow.
actually auctioning off the rights to name it to raise money for the conservation of the snakes. But yeah, hey, if you find an insect, Theo, name it after yourself, man.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
Well, there was one insect actually I haven't mentioned that I was really, really hoping to see, and it's a cave wetter. So normally they live in inside caves or
Mm-hmm.
in dark, dark areas, but supposedly in the 1990s, some of them were seen on an offshore island on the Antipodes, and so the
Mm-hmm.
whole time I was just absolutely hoping that I would see one on the mainland, and that was going to be my big claim to fame was being able to
Right.
capture one of these mythical cave wetters, but
No.
it didn't eventuate. Yeah, I was really sad
All
about
right.
that.
All right. Well, when you go back, That will be the goal. So, can you now? How did you get back? And I know the story, but can you describe for the listeners? Because the Navy dropped you off, so you had this bigger patrol
Yeah,
boat, right?
yeah, yeah,
How did you get back, and how long did it take you?
yeah. So we got well, just getting off the island was a mission in its own right.
Mhm.
So the weather conditions were getting really rough, and we had to do a bit of a scramble to get the essential items and stuff off the island. But we got picked up by the evalaute, which is a little yacht, 25 meters
It's,
long.
it's tiny.
Yeah, it's really small. There was about 15 or 16 of us. I forget exactly how many people living on this yacht. But it took 3 days for us to get back from the Antipodes to the mainland. And yeah, we had some really, really nasty weather on the way back. We had 7 meter swells at one point,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
in a in a 25-meter boat, yeah, it felt pretty big.
Yeah.
I was
Oh yeah.
pretty horrendously seasick for a good part of it. Not as seasick as some of the
Oh.
others. There was a girl there, B. She was with
Yeah.
a Royal Society of Birds from the UK,
Mm.
and she got sick really, really quickly. And I felt so sorry for her, but
Oh,
yeah.
yeah, that would have been me. I just would want to die. I would just want to die. I mean, I've been out on little boats in the ocean, and I just, oh yeah, yep. I
Yeah.
heard about that. I was like, this
Um,
little yacht and all your samples and all those people stuffed in.
yeah.
So
No, it was,
that's great. No, it's awesome, Theo. I mean, thank you for sharing with our listeners. It's just it's like you're an explorer, and it's asking about your trip, to a really really remote place on Earth where very very few people have ever been.
yeah.
And I know you're really focused on insects, and insects conservation is a big deal. So I promise you, we will do an insect episode.
Yeah,
I know we want to do
totally.
the honeybee, and then I can interview Ashley, but maybe we'll put the giant weta on there or something like that. Something
Yeah,
cool.
you have to do the giant weather.
Yeah, but from your perspective, right? You know, from the insect world involved in ecology, is how do we convince people? Because I always like to ask this question to all my guests. It is worth fighting for. It was worth the investment to send you to the Antipodes. It was worth, even though this island is way off in the middle of the Pacific Ocean by itself, we still have to look out for those remote places and monitor them and, evaluate the ecology. So, from your opinion, or in your opinion, how do we convince others that it is worthwhile?
Yeah, that is a tricky question, but I
Yeah.
think the best way to do it is by exposing people to the amazing nature that's out there and getting them to put their own value on wildlife and
Mhm.
um, yeah, nature. So however you can do that, I guess, yeah, through mediums like your podcast or encouraging them to go outside and just be, in awe of trees and bugs and the animals that they see. Um, and then hopefully from there, maybe they can get involved with community groups and volunteering. And yeah, I don't know. It is difficult, but yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's hard to describe why why we do what we
Yeah.
do. But yeah,
Yeah. Well, you do it because you love it, right? I mean,
yeah,
since you were
absolutely,
a
yeah.
kid. Yeah. 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 And it's amazing. I'll tell you what, New Zealand is a special place. And, I'm encouraging all the listeners to come visit. The people here are incredible. So I could see how you could survive a month with a bunch of Kiwis. I think if it was a bunch of us Yanks, we would have killed somebody. There would have been one person left standing, but
Yeah,
you
Hunger
put a
Games
bunch of
style.
Kiwis together. Oh yeah, especially if you start talking politics, it's ugly.
Cool.
Um, I guess my final question is, and I guess this is another tricky question. Sorry, but how could our listeners support, say, the Antipodes? Like, what could they do? What's the one thing that would come to mind to
Yeah.
help support? I guess insect populations, healthy insect populations, or is there anything they could do to say maybe the Antipodes?
I mean, the Antipodes itself is so far away. It's sort of hard to say exactly. I mean, the main thing we could do is because the Antipodes is such a refuge for seabirds, would be to look
Mm-hmm.
after our oceans a bit better. So maybe getting involved with petitioning for less long line use. So long lines are a bit of a issue in New Zealand with fishing. Trying not to use as much plastic so that we don't have so much plastic floating in the oceans because all these seabirds, they rely on the ocean for their food source and, ends up doing terrible things to their bodies when they consume it. So
Mm-hmm.
indirectly, I mean, that's one way you could support a place like the Antipodes. Um, but I mean, there's also some really good foundations that are doing cool work on places like the Antipodes. So I should probably mention that the Antipodes
Yeah.
mouse eradication was supported by the World Wildlife Fund, which you might be
Okay. Yeah.
familiar with. There's
Mm-hmm.
also the
Mm-hmm.
Morgan Foundation, Island, Cons- Island Conservation Group, and the Department of Conservation in New Zealand. So yeah,
Great.
supporting groups like that
Yeah.
would go a long way to benefiting places like the Antipodes Island. Yeah.
No, that's good to hear too, and I'll definitely put them in the show notes. I'll put links up for that. And then any pictures that you may be able to share, I'm sure our listeners would love to look at that.
Yeah,
Because
cool.
it was great. Thank you so much for taking the time after a long day of work. I know you guys work hard over there at Planting Food. And, thanks for sharing your experience. I look forward to having dinner, go have a beer, whatever, talking more about it
Totally.
with you off air. Yeah. But cheers. And thank you so much, Theo, for joining us.
Hey, no.
Theo Van Noort and from New Zealand.
Thank you, Chris. Thanks.